Hi again then guys, and welcome to another Rivals match on Gran Turismo 6 in particular. And in this particular rivalry we've got three vehicles going head to head, and all three of these cars fall in a very similar category. As you'd assume, that's why we're putting them head to head. They're three muscle cars, but at the same time they are all three classic muscle cars, but retrofitted or aftermarket tuned, in other words, with modern parts and modern upgrade advantages, stuff which a classic muscle car just wouldn't have access to way back then, like better gearboxes, stiffer suspension, that kind of stuff, at least not in road form. Now the three cars are the Camaro Mustang, the Red Devil Camaro, and the Camaro RS. My favourite of the three is the Camaro RS, even though it's not as quick as the other two and not as powerful. However, as we always do, we'll break down each of the three cars on their own, give a rough overview of what the vehicle's like, maybe some good and bad points, then of course we'll put them in a head-to-head, top trump style spec beatdown, if you will, to see which one comes out on top overall. First up then we have the Camaro Mustang from Grand Touring Garage. This is a very popular car. Now this car is always going to be popular because it's a classic Mustang. The Mustang has a huge amount of fans. Personally, I'm not one of them, but what this car does offer is notable. For a start, it's the cheapest of the three. Now all three vehicles are well over 700 grand, so it's not exactly cheap still, but it is cheaper than the other two, and that's notable. As far as power, it's not quite the most powerful, but it's got over 800 horsepower in peak form, and the performance is very strong. All three of these cars, but especially this one, I would say, make very convincing makeshift NASCARs for oval racing. This one already looks the part. It looks kind of like a dragster meets a classic NASCAR. It's got a great interior, it looks good from the outside, and also as far as the visual upgrades go, it's quite restrained. In fact, all three of these cars are relatively restrained. They don't go crazy with the visuals. The craziest of the three is probably the Camaro RS with the carbon fibre bonnet and trunk. Now, as far as this car's straight line performance, it's not lacking, not at all. You're looking at over 260 miles per hour, even without NOS or slipstream. The acceleration is very good, but the most surprising thing I would say about all three cars is not the straight line performance, it's the handling. Because as I've said before, muscle cars typically are not thought of for their cornering ability. But the fact is, if you leave the performance relatively alone, leave it to one side, and just focus on the things which it isn't good at, such as high weight, bad gear ratios, and soft suspension, if you fix those things, then the great thing about a muscle car is the straight line speed pretty much always takes care of itself, and you can definitely feel that with all three of these cars. Even if you don't fully upgrade them, they're still excellent track machines, and especially given that even though they are hugely powerful and very torquey and extremely quick in a straight line, the PP levels for the most part are not ridiculously high. This Mustang, for instance, is under 600, and for a car with 817 horsepower, that's pretty impressive, especially given that the handling is good. It's not just passable, it's specifically, I would say, good. What though about the Red Devil? Well, the Red Devil is by far the most powerful of the three. A lot of people consider it to be the fastest muscle car in the game. That's actually not the case. It's about on par with the Oldsmobile, the Jay Leno vehicle. But of the three, it is the quickest. It has the most power by quite a lot, 971 horsepower, but it's the torque where it really runs away with it. 1,068 pound-feet compared to not even 700 apiece for the other two cars. But that being said, it's not even bad in terms of weight either. It's a strong car in pretty much every way because the Red Devil is also a lot lighter, for instance, than the Camaro Mustang. It is also heavier than the Camaro RS, so it's pretty well placed. It's around the middle. It has a very strong mix of both high power and low weight. The PP level is much higher though than the other two. Both of the others are well under 600. This one's 621, and that's some pretty serious territory for a muscle car, no matter how powerful or how fast it is. In a straight line, this one is still looking at around 260, 270 flat out, without NOS or slipstream of course, but it gets to that speed much more quickly than either of the other cars, especially when you compare it to the Camaro RS, because that car is far, far weaker in a straight line. However, just like the Camaro Mustang, I would say that the Red Devil is a surprisingly capable car through twisty circuits. You would not expect a 970 horsepower Camaro that is still rear-wheel drive, it doesn't even have the advantage of a conversion, to have good handling. You'd expect it to maybe be somewhat of a dragster, to be honest, but it's not. It's, again, a really good track car. It doesn't feel as powerful as it is, but not in a bad way. In a straight line, of course, it does feel that powerful, but through the corners, it's not constantly trying to wheel spin, it's not burning up its tyres, it copes with the power and torque really well, and the fact that it's already built to have a huge amount of power, far more than either of the other two, helps that a lot. What, though, about the car which is technically perhaps the weakest of the three, but still my personal favourite, the Camaro RS? Well, the Posse Camaro RS is, as I mentioned, my choice of the three if I'm just going to drive one for fun, and to be honest, maybe even just for a track car as well. If I'm going to use it for PP-specific racing, I might choose this Camaro. One of the reasons why I prefer this one to the other two is just personal preference. I prefer the 1970 shaped Camaro to the 69. It's my favourite generation of Camaro overall. I love the wide, squat stance that it has. To me, it suits having very big rims, whereas the other two look much more traditional in the way that their appearance is. They're much more traditional muscle cars or hot rods or dragsters, whereas this one can look like a convincing drift car if you want it to as well. Now, in terms of trackability, it's great still. It's not as quick as the other two, but it is still very, very impressive. And again, it's easy to think of this car as being weak just because it doesn't have numbers that are quite as good, but it is the lightest of the three. 1280 kilos is very good for a muscle car, and even though it's the least powerful, it's still got 716 horsepower. The top speed is far less. It can do around 230, 235, but again, that is more than fast enough to take on pretty much any muscle car apart from the aftermarket tuned ones. It's when you go up against these kind of cars that it starts to show. But the acceleration is still very good, and unfortunately this car is kind of kept in the shadow of the other two for the most part, which is understandable, but I would still say it's an excellent car in its own way. But with those individual reviews out of the way, how do they compare directly? Well, let's find out. First of all then we have the price, and as I mentioned in the outset of the video, the Trans Camera is 25 grand cheaper than the other two, which of course is enough to give it a victory, although all three cars are really expensive. These three cars put together are roughly the same price as a Mercedes Sauber C9. That could be pretty good value though, depending on how you look at it. As far as engine capacity goes, it's a very, very narrow win for the Red Devil with exactly 7,000cc, only 2cc larger than the Trans Camera. Both of them are 7 litres in capacity, but it just edges it out to get that victory. But even the Posse Camaro is still a 6.6 litre, so it's not that far behind. As far as PP level, well, I mentioned earlier on, the Red Devil is the only of the three to go above 600, 621, so of course that one gets the point there. Likewise, as far as both power and torque, it's in fact the easiest wins overall for the Red Devil in those ways. It's got a lot more power, but the torque is where it really has that runaway victory for another 2 points for both power and torque. As far as weight though, as I alluded to earlier, it's the Camaro RS which actually edges that one out by a pretty decent margin. It's about 100 kilos lighter than the Stilo Red Devil and a whole lot lighter than the Trans Camera Mustang. The Mustang is actually still pretty heavy even after the full weight loss package. However, even though the weight is so low, it is still the Red Devil, mainly thanks to its massive power, that does edge it out there as far as horsepower per tonne, being the only one of the three that goes over 700, which really is supercar level, whereas both of the other two in real life would be supercar level, but on the game you're looking more like a heavily tuned super sports car in terms of horsepower per tonne, but certainly not bad still. And as far as lap times go, as always we don't give that a point because there are far too many variables involved, like the tuning, the track, the selection of driver of course, but it is interesting to note that the quickest was the Red Devil, which is kind of not surprising but potentially surprising at the same time, because although obviously it's the fastest in a straight line, Daytona isn't just a straight line track, not the road course at least, so it is interesting to see that even with corners involved, it was still the fastest. Again, with me driving. Then it's the Trans Camera Mustang, roughly 2 seconds behind, and then roughly another 2 seconds behind that, the Camaro RS. So not a huge difference between all three cars, but of course lap after lap, that gap would increase more and more. And overall then, as a tabulation of all of their scores put together, all of those individual points, in joint second place we have both the Camaro RS and the Trans Camera Mustang with 1 point apiece. The Camera is the cheapest, the Camaro RS is the lightest, both interesting advantages to have, but of course with engine capacity, PP level, power, torque and horsepower per ton, it's a pretty easy win for the Red Devil. It is one of those cars which is incredibly strong on paper, but unlike a lot of other cars which have huge numbers, something like a Jay Leno tank car for instance, or the Oldsmobile, this car actually lives up to those numbers. The Red Devil is a formidable machine both in a straight line and around corners. It's not quite as quick as some people think it is for top-end speed, but it is definitely one of the quickest muscle cars in the game. But overall, all three cars offer, I would say, very different approaches to a similar concept. Heavily tuned, aftermarket, show-level muscle cars. My personal favourite is the more, say, drift-happy and cornering-focused of the three, the Camaro RS. If you're looking for the strongest, well, of course, that's the Red Devil. And the Mustang, well, on paper, it doesn't seem to be as strong, but the reality is that the Camera Mustang is hugely popular for a reason. It's a very competitive car. So if you get any of the three, you won't really be disappointed. They're all very good for different things, and some of the advantages that they have do definitely overlap. But that's it overall for this particular Rivals match. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.